Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer. This is their part number BB5005-450T-605. This is a ball bearing hinge that has ball tips, and we're going to dissect the part number and go over what those different pieces mean of the part number, and we're going to talk about where you would use it. I'm pulling up the my little cheat sheet here. So a BB5005, first of all, it is an amazingly beautiful hinge. The 5 in the part number at the end tells us that it's not only heavyweight, but that it's made of solid brass. So this is a ball tip. The bottom line is this is a ball bearing, heavyweight, solid brass, ball tip, polished brass hinge. Ball bearing, if I haven't already said that. It's just gorgeous. It's a gorgeous hinge. You know, the fact that it's heavyweight means that it's going to be rated for a substantially heavy type of door. Wanted to inspect the leaf work that was done on the edge. So where are you going to use this? Well, probably very likely a front doors of a church is where you'd see very nice solid brass, decorative tip, certainly ball bearing. A residential application where you had an unusually thicker or larger than standard door. Using a heavyweight hinge is always a good idea because it's just simply more robust, because not only is the leaf thickness substantially thicker, but with a heavyweight hinge you get 4 bearing packets versus a standard weight hinge that is thinner and 2 bearing packets. The leaf thickness on a standard hinge, a standard weight, is 134 thousandths. This is 180 thousandths. So that's, almost, it's a 40% increase in the thickness. But it gives you a substantially greater ability to handle a heavier door, a wider door, a taller door. 70% of the weight of the door is hung on that top hinge. So you will certainly notice that wear on hinges that hang a door always occurs most clearly, most obviously at that top hinge. And one way to mitigate that is to use a hinge that's appropriate for the application, and that would certainly include a heavyweight hinge with those extra bearing packets. And the fact that it's ball tip just tells me it's obviously some sort of a application that demands a decorative type of tip option on the hinge. So the BB in the part number stands for ball bearing. The 5 in the first 5 means that it is a 5-knuckle hinge. You can use your imagination and see why we call it a 5-knuckle hinge. The 0 means that it's full mortise. So the 5, then the 0 means that it's full mortise. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaves here and here that the door and frame, when the door is in the closed position, these leaves are meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame, so that you can maintain that tight margin between the two leaves. The next 0 means standard. It's not an unusual hinge in the sense that it's being swing clear or half surface or anchor type hinge. The 5 in the last portion of the 5005 means 2 things: heavyweight, and it means made of steel, made of brass. So this is a solid brass hinge that's going to be certainly non-ferrous and heavyweight. This ought to weigh 180 thousandths, and my caliper tells me it's 0.181, so that's pretty much on the money. Where would you use solid brass? Well, a couple of instances, really. Number one is when you're looking for something non-ferrous. There's no plating that's happening here over a steel-based hinge. That is just polishing the natural base material that is in play, and then putting a lacquer over it. So where you would use a solid brass hinge will be where you don't want anything to rust. Okay. But also, you're going to use it in applications where you want the finish. This could be an interior door. the finish needs to be representative of a brass base material. What I mean to say is the beautiful polished brass finish on this hinge is going to look different than if it was a polished brass finish on a steel-based hinge. You can tell the steel-based hinge looks more reflective and metallic. A polished brass finish over solid brass really reflects a more warm type of, or inviting type of look to the hinge. It's more gold. It's brass. It's not plated over steel. So you might be looking for this because you want the richness of the base material to come through. That'd be why you might order this. Then we've got the part number 450. That means this hinge is 4.5 inch tall, and the height is the first dimension, and 4.5 inch wide. It's really important to realize, or to at least be equipped with the knowledge, that the height is the first dimension, because while you have a square hinge here, you don't really have to know which is the height. But if you had a 5 by 4.5, or a 4.5 by 7, or a 4.5 by 4, or a 3.5 by 6, you get the point. Any rectangular hinge, you need to know the height is the first dimension so that when the door is being prepped, it's being prepped correctly. You don't want to have a 5 by 4.5 and prep it for 4.5, and you order 4.5 by 5 inch hinges. That would be no good. You get into heavyweight hinges like this with the ball bearings, you're very commonly going to see 5 inch tall, 6 inch tall. 5 by 4.5 would be a very appropriate hinge. For the same door thickness, this would certainly be appropriate for an 1 3/4 thick door. If you had a door that was thicker, you're going to start to think about a 5 inch wide hinge. But regardless of the door height, the door thickness, increasing the height is generally a very good idea when you have a door that might go from 3 foot to 3'6", or 125 pounds to 175 pounds. Going with that taller hinge, I read a spec somewhere that said there's about a 20% increase in the hinge's ability to handle the weight of the door, to handle the job it's being asked to do when you go from 4.5 inch to 5 inch. So that's pretty substantial. And you will notice wear and tear on that top hinge all the time. This is 450, that's 4.5, 4.5. The T in the part number tells us that it is a ball tip. That is the most common of all decorative tips. The standard tip is your button tip. That's just what you would get if you didn't specify. Ball tip is the most common of the decorative tips. You can do urn tip, steeple tip, acorn tip, ball tip, urn tip, steeple tip, acorn tip. Yeah, those are the 4 common decorative tips. Then you have your button tip. The finish, the part number after that is 605. Now that certainly means polished brass, but it's different than 632, which also means polished brass. 605 means it's made of brass. 632 means that it's made of steel. So we know that this is not only polished brass, but we know the base material is steel because it's inferred directly in the finish code that's been applied. You're going to get screws with all of this. They are sending all wood and all machine screws. Be mindful that they're steel, and that's typical because it's not foul to do that in the sense of incorrect from the perspective that you really do want it's awfully handy to have a screw that's going to have a greater strength than a brass screw. Although something tells me that these screws are indeed not. I find it hard to believe that they're steel, and while they're obviously magnetic, they're not substantially magnetic. Something tells me that there's perhaps something else in play here that I'm not aware of. But be mindful to, by all means, declare the base material of the screws that you would like so we can transfer that information to the factory to be clear what type of screw that you're getting. When you are pre-drilling the holes for the screws, depending on the wood that you're going into, a softwood or a hardwood, if it's a hardwood, I would probably go about 90% of the root diameter of the screw, just the portion of the body of the screw, not including the threads. If it's a softwood, I would certainly go a little bit smaller than that, maybe 75 or 80% of the root diameter of that. So, I've been taught you just pre-drill your hole the size of the root of the screw itself, but more current information given to me defines it further by what are you screwing to, a soft material or a hardwood material, and adjust accordingly. A hardwood, you're going to make that hole ever so slightly larger. I like wire-sized drill bits because they allow you to be much more defined in terms of 90% of the root diameter. You might not find a 1/16 of an inch, drill bit that best suits. You can put that caliper and get that root diameter, come up with the appropriate wire size drill bit, and be happily on your way. In terms of the screws, also define what you would like. Tell us the composition of the door and frame. If it's wood door, wood frame, which this very likely is. Specify all wood screws. No need for them to send the metal screws when you're just not going to use them and have no need for them. But you'll certainly want to be clear, because it's unusual that they would send, not unusual, but I would not expect to get all machine screws and all wood screws. You would generally get half of one, but in the interest of just avoiding getting an incomplete screw package, define it when you order it in the comment field. This hinge from Bommer can be made in lots of different variations, and those variations include options such as 3-knuckle, where rather than 5 there are 3 knuckles. You can change, of course, the type of hinge, full mortise, half surface, things of that nature, different types of hinge, different thicknesses and base materials, different decorative tips, different sizes, different finishes, different applications, like an anchor hinge or a raised barrel hinge or a slip-in hinge or an electrified hinge or a hinge that will allow electric transfer. Security options, non-removable pin. This hinge was not ordered with a non-removable pin or a security stud, so I would figure that these are in-swinging doors that you would not require any sort of provision by which to prevent the driving out of the pin itself. And I'll tell you, I like the ball tip when it's on a heavyweight hinge because it's simply larger. The barrel is larger on the hinge, the pin is thicker. The ball tip has to be proportionally larger as well, so you really can tell a heavyweight not only by looking at the fact that it has 4 bearing packets versus 2, but you look at those ball tips and you say, boy, those are big. And they're handsome is what I'm really driving at. It's a very nice looking hinge. Finally, there is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. The last thing I'd like to point out to you is right above the Bommer logo, it says Made in the USA, a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. Any questions on the Bommer? This is their part number BB5005-450T-605, or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.